And we're live. Hello,
Hey
Brittany.
everybody.
How are we?
Oh, I'm tired. I feel like I'm getting sick. I have
Yeah.
like one tonsil that's like a weird one, so it's kind of bothering me. So I hope that I'm not getting sick. And I've been like skirting by with all of the flu and everything going around the schools and my family and everything. So hopefully I'm not getting sick, but I feel tired. So I think I might be
Yeah.
getting sick.
I was really tired as well.
Mhm.
I just drove home from rehab again, and I feel all right though. It's like as soon as we put the big lights on, and then we're like, yeah, we're live. I'm like, yeah, sweet. I'm glad I didn't have any extra caffeine because sometimes you have caffeine late in the day, you're just flying through that, and you can't get to sleep. So,
Oh, that's not I'm never like that. I don't like caffeine in general. And whenever I have it, it never like gives me energy. It just gives me like anxiousness. Like I just get anxious. So I'm
oh,
always
really?
like I wonder what those people are like that, caffeine is wonderful for and just gives them like all the energy.
Love caffeine. It's great. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I don't think I could live without it, but that's common with many people. Anyway, what's been going on? How's your week going?
Oh, I've got like lots of stuff has gone on this week. I went to I'm part of this like advisory committee for the local rehab hospital, and it's supposed to be advise like patient and family advisory committee. So we're supposed to be advising projects, doctors, and basic units on the like in the hospital on care for patients and families and how to improve that. So that's been interesting because it's like never it's a new committee, so we've gotten some training on what it means to be an advisor versus an advocate and stuff like that. So that's been kind of fun. And it's mostly me and a bunch of like 75-year-olds that are, retired and have lots of time to volunteer. So it's interesting, but they're so fun. So I'm gonna, make a bunch of friends with a bunch of retirees, and it's gonna be awesome. So that's good. I went to a dueling piano show on the weekend, which was
Ooh.
really fun. I love dueling piano shows, and I don't know if anybody's ever gone to them before, but they are so much fun. It's like ultimate in live music, and you get to request songs and they try them. Sometimes they're amazing. And this particular like duo, actually it was three piano people that were like switching on and off because, one person would need a break here and there. But the one guy was like literally amazing, and he rapped like he did.
No way.
You guys know the song Rap God? By
I'm aware of it.
it's like the fastest rap on the planet. He did it like live. It was so cool.
No
Um,
way.
yeah, so that was really fun. Jacob had a fight because he's in competitive boxing. So he had a
Oh,
fight.
right. Okay.
Yeah, so he had a fight this weekend. Yeah, he was like he had a fight, and they're like, "What?" So I thought I should preface that with it's a sport. And then it was while I was at the piano show, so I was like so stressed out because I've never not missed one of his fights, and so I'm like
Oh,
texting his coach, and I'm be like, "Did he fight yet? Is he okay?" So yeah, I did a lot of stuff, but I wanted to ask you first off about this fight I had with Joe, and it's not necessarily a fight. It was just something he said that bothered me,
mm.
and I know why it bothered me, but I want to ask you as somebody with a disability if it would bother you. And I know objectively what he was saying. It's just it feels hurtful to me. So the conversation was we were driving home, and I was because I have lots of friends in wheelchairs, and so I was saying that he probably doesn't even think about the wheelchair anymore because I have so many friends in wheelchairs, and so do we. And like my best friend Brian is also his one of his best friends too. And so I was like, if like we weren't together anymore or I died, you probably wouldn't even think twice about, dating somebody in a wheelchair. And his answer was, no, I would never ever date somebody in a wheelchair again. I would never actively seek out somebody with a disability. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, no, I would never actively like he's like if I fell in love with somebody in a wheelchair and I happen to like the person, but he's like I would never like actively seek out somebody with a disability. And I was like, what are you saying? Like that you would never choose to be with me again if we weren't together? And he's like, no, I'm not saying I wouldn't choose you. I'm just saying I wouldn't choose disability again. He's like, would you actively choose disability again if you had to choose it over again? And I was like, well, no, but that's different than marrying somebody with a disability. And I was so offended by it. And he was like, okay, you're like taking this the wrong way. He's like, if you had it to do over again, would you choose all the challenges that disability, like with a disability, or would you choose not? And I was like, well, and then I like understood it when he was talking about it in that context. So then it annoyed me for like a full day. I was so annoyed with him yesterday. I was like barely talking to him. And I was just mostly trying to like deal with that in my head because I understand what he's saying. But I like, yeah. Anyway, so I wanted to ask your opinion on it. Would it annoy you? Do you think it was an insensitive thing for him to say? Or do you think, because I was like, why would you say that? Now you just make me feel like I'm a burden. And he's like, well, do you want me to lie? He's like, I don't lie to you about anything ever. And he's like, I'm just being honest. He's like, I don't think I would never not want this relationship because I love you. But he's like, I just wouldn't choose it again if I knew, all the
Yeah.
challenges. And I was like, okay, that I don't know. Anyway.
I wouldn't punish Joe for his honesty. I think if from what I gather, there's been a lot of misinterpretation there. I think what he said was fairly straightforward, common sense, and I feel like you might have got a little bit over offended by it. If I take it the right way, like I want to be honest with you. I'm not like steel manning his perspective, just for the sake of it. I can totally see what he's saying, like, and at least now he's not a devotee, right? So if something terrible happened to you, like, no, he wouldn't seek out someone else in a wheelchair. I think that's a fairly common sense thing to say. I think possibly you might be being a little bit oversensitive. He's not in any way saying that being with you is a burden. He's just saying, like, why would I seek out someone in a wheelchair? And he clearly did say if, for example, he fell in love with someone in a wheelchair, he would do it. But, I think it's a fairly common sense, very honest answer. And I don't think it's controversial.
I don't know, like maybe it's just because you're a guy, but I was like, I still am like, reeling from it. And I think just it's one of those things that like brings up the question, which I put in the title of the video, are people with disabilities burdens? Because like objectively, if you're thinking like in an objective sense, like from the definition of what a burden is, yeah, we are burdens to society, to our families, and to ourselves. Like it is more challenging to have disability. Are we less valuable to society, to our families? No, we're not less valuable, but like, and I have a lot of like limiting, I've dealt with a lot of limiting beliefs over the years in a wheelchair about that very question. Am I a burden to my kids, to my family, to society in general? Would the world be better off without us? And like, these are dark questions that you ask in like really shitty times when you're feeling really crappy about yourself. But I have asked that question a lot. Like, would my kids be better off without me? And obviously, like when I'm not feeling like crap, I know the answer is absolutely they would not be better off without me. Having a loving, present parent is always better than having no parent at all, no matter what the disability is. But yeah, I just think it's a good thing to bring up, because I think these are feelings and thoughts that a lot of people with disabilities, especially when they're first paralyzed, have. And I know that like one of the things I try to do all the time, especially when I did that video about all the negative emotions,
Brilliant video.
when you have a disability. And one of the things that like I try not to do is when somebody brings up like a shitty thing about my disability, I try not to take it personally, and I try to relate to them instead, because if I get frustrated with my disability, it's okay for somebody else to get frustrated with my disability. But it's really hard not to take it personally when it feels like it's because of me, right? So anyway, that seemed like there was like no like, yeah, maybe it was insensitive. You were just like, no, I think it's pretty straightforward. And I think you're overly offended.
I have to be honest, and I think there's so many things that I want to talk about from this, stemming from this. But let me just make a quick note, and then I'll get on to the first one, being a burden. So when I was first injured, that was one of the biggest reasons that I was like going to end it all, because I was like, I'm going to be a burden. I'm going to be, and what was making me more of a burden was thinking that I was a burden and just being useless, like staying in bed all the time. You know what I mean? Just feeling useless and like being like, oh, I can't contribute that much. And then over the years, I've found a way to be fiercely independent. I've changed my attitude so I can, I no longer need anything from anyone. You know, I specifically don't have handles on my wheelchair because I don't want to be pushed. And, you know, I don't feel like a burden. Occasionally, sometimes they say, for example, if I'm in a group setting and, you know, I need to be carried up the stairs. Again, not really. I don't feel like a burden because some people are, I can't really think of like, for example, when we go swimming, me and Chris, like she was piggybacking me in the lake, which was amazing, but now she's hurt her back, unrelated. So she can't piggyback me in the lake. So, for example, yeah, there are certain times where I feel like my disability holds us back a little bit, but you know, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I don't think we are a burden necessarily, but then it depends on like the level of your disability. Really, I personally don't feel like a burden, but if I was paralyzed, if I had a much higher injury and I needed full-time care, I might feel like more of a burden. You know, if I was contributing to society in a more valuable way, I'd feel less. Like, for example, Stephen Hawking was like, he needed full-time care, but he was a net positive for humanity, you know, like he was very special. So I guess it just depends on how much you can contribute and how much you personally feel like a burden. But I don't think there's that much. I don't think people with disabilities are necessarily burdens. But also, I want to go back to your thing with Joe. I really feel like that could be one of those things where, only because like I'm looking at it from a completely neutral perspective. Like you told me like what Joe said, what you said, and like I wasn't there when it happened. I didn't know how he said it, like if there was nuance in the way he said it and the way you took it. But there's like history between you two, right? So I don't know if there's anything there. But on the face of it, from the information you've given me, I didn't think it was a necessarily very controversial thing to say, and fairly straightforward, you know, like if, for example, I had an ex-girlfriend that dated someone else in a wheelchair, I would think that was weird. Well, rather than like, oh, good for you, you know, I would just be like, oh, yeah, you know what I mean? So
yeah. And like I said, I actually like apologized to him for being so grumpy to him about it like yesterday, because I was like, I realized that it was my own thing, which is, I think, a lot of what causes people to be defensive out in society. It's not anything that anybody said, especially now when, you know, people are very easily offended about a lot of things. And it's really about how you perceive yourself is how you project, you know, when you're, I guess, absorbing whatever somebody else is saying. Which it like that, it was you sent me a podcast last week. And in that podcast, they referenced something about this scar experiment. And I really believe, like you said, if you feel like a burden, you become one. And in this experiment that they were talking about, just for people that don't know what we're talking about, it's been all over TikTok and stuff. So it's these people that went into a research project, and they were told that they were going to put a makeup on them to make them look facially disfigured. And then they were going to go into a job interview. And so they made their scar and made their facial disfigurement. They made them look in the mirror. And then right before they went into the job interview, they told them that they were going to touch up their makeup. But then what they actually did was remove the facial disfigurement completely. And then after, they interviewed them to see if they were discriminated against based on their facial disfigurement. And all of them said that they had experienced discrimination, direct quotes from the people in the job interviews referencing their disfigurement and stuff. And so this is really common, I think, with disability. If you feel like you're conspicuous, weird, a burden, whatever it is, then you will experience those things in life. And it's actually not the thing itself, like the disability, the facial disfigurement, that is creating the hardships. It's you creating the hardships with your perception of them. And so I thought that was such an interesting concept, and one that I think has been very true in my own life, because if I have believed that people didn't want to hang out with me because of my wheelchair, then I actively noticed things that people did to ignore me or whatever. But now that I think I'm like, oh, I'm this social butterfly, everybody wants to hang out with me. Now I notice people are always like coming up to me and everybody wants to hang out with me. And sometimes I'm like, geez, this wheelchair thing is really annoying because I'm very like conspicuous and approachable. And so yeah, it's rang true for me in my own life for sure.
Yeah, that was a really great podcast. I'm glad that it resonated with you so much as
Yeah, it
well.
was
I
awesome.
sent it to Brian as well. He loved it as well, so it was really good. But yeah, the scar experiment was so enlightening. So yeah, and imagine how not having a scar, and then people were like they were staring at it, and like what the hell? What do you, like, they would what? It's all in your head. So
It's
yeah, if you
totally.
think you're a burden, then you become a burden. And I've had that same experience where what you said, like if I feel like if I go out somewhere and I'm in the way, like, oh, I'm trying to weave through a crowd of people and I feel like a burden, then like, the world reflects that back to me. Whereas if I'm just like, hey guys, get out of the way, and then a load of people will be like, oh, the wheelchair guy's coming through. It's I don't know. You really do, the attitude that you project into the world gets reflected back to you. I'm a firm believer of that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Um, when you were talking about a little while ago about you not having push handles, that just reminded me of something that happened when I was at the event, the piano event. I was sitting at my table, and this lady figured I should be dancing, which I did dance a few times, but she thought I should be dancing at that moment. And I had my brakes on under the table, but she
Oh,
literally came up from behind me and tried to take me from behind, like out of the table, and push me on the dance floor. And she just ended up tipping me backwards. And I was like, no, I'm good. She's like, no, you need to be dancing. She was so
oh,
drunk. And I'm like,
awful.
I'm good. I'll dance when I feel like dancing. And then another thing that happened, which was related to that, was I was at an event talking to some engineering students about modifications and gaps in society that they could help fill with devices. And one of the people came up afterwards and said, is it ever okay to touch your wheelchair or help without me asking you? So I wanted to bring that up to you because I thought is an interesting thing about how a wheelchair for some people doesn't feel as like there's not as much personal space or
Mm.
personal space boundaries with a wheelchair. So people touch it often. Like if I'm sitting in a waiting room, people will like put their foot on my chair on my wheel and like
Oh,
wheel it back and forth. Like, and I don't think they're noticing what they're doing, but I'm like, why are you wheeling my wheelchair? Like it's so weird. So I wanted to ask you how often that happens to you and what your reaction is, or if you're just kind of like, if you get really offended or annoyed, or if it's just kind of like, whoa, don't touch me, please.
yeah. I mean, that is utterly gross behavior, I think, for someone to just drunkenly grab you and be like, you should be
Oh,
dancing right now. I'd be like, fuck off. Excuse my
I
French.
really,
But
yeah.
I was like, I really felt that viscerally when you were explaining that, especially if they're drunk and you're like, get off me, man. Like, that's like trying to just grab someone, it's just trying to pick someone
I
up. Like, you
know.
wouldn't
It's
just pick a
awful.
random lady up, would you? That's really quite taking advantage, I think. And yeah, the thing is, like, wheelchairs there's so many different types of wheelchair. When people think of a wheelchair, most people, they think of like if you Google wheelchair, there's just the hospital chair, you know what I mean? With the
Yeah.
big handles, the wheelchairs I see at rehab all the time, where people are 95% of the time just getting wheeled around. And I'm like, this is not the same thing. I mean, it's technically under the same bracket, but it doesn't have
Yeah.
handles. It's small. It's a personal light active wheelchair. It's my mobility device.
Yeah.
Don't touch me, And I wish that I was as polite to be like, oh, no thanks. But if someone does try and wheel me, I usually am quite quick to snap and be like, hey, like I'm either like
Yeah.
giving them the communication with the eyes or, verbally, I'm just like, don't, absolutely not. Like you've crossed the boundary here. Which, it does actually, something happened to me in the laundrette actually when I was doing my washing this week. And there were these guys in there. They were, how can I paint them as slightly unsavory? I don't know. Like they were drinking like, those strong cans of beer. And I don't want to, but like it was the middle of the day and, whatever,
Yeah.
do what you want. But like they were in there and one of them had a dog and then like the dog went to say hello and then he like whacked the dog around the head. And I was like, Jesus, there's no need to that. He was only saying hello. Anyway, they were fairly unsavory characters, but
Yeah.
like I live in a fairly well-to-do place and they weren't bad. But like I went to like put my money in the machine and the guy like snatched the money out my hand and I was like, hey, what the hell are you doing, man? Give it back. And I like took it back and he was like, oh, no. And he was trying to explain to me how you do it. And I was like, fuck off. I was like, I do my washing here all the time. I was like, I know how the
Yeah.
machine works, right? Like you don't have to treat me like a kid because I'm in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Anyway, snatch the money back off him, put him in the machine, put my washing in. I was really, really annoyed. And then I realized that like basically he was just trying to help. So on the way out of the laundrette, I just said, because like he like opened the door for me and was like, you know, and I was like, hey, listen, sorry if I was rude, but you know, what did I say? I was like, I didn't mean to be rude. I know you were just trying to help. And then he said to me, he's like, okay, I understand. It's not your first day in a wheelchair. I'm sorry. And I said, yeah, it's cool. But it's so weird how like, just because I'm like, I literally wheeled in there, like so independently, had everything there. And he just thought he had to show me how the fucking machine worked. I'm like,
Yeah.
jog on. So yeah, that was something where I had a reaction that was probably, but he also snatched the money out of my hand. Do you know what I mean? So I was like,
Yeah.
what, am I getting robbed? Like, what the hell?
That is so weird. And
Yeah.
it's weird that people, I get that people are trying to help sometimes, and that people, like the drunk girl was genuinely excited about me as an individual with a disability, and she wanted to dance with me. That's fine. But like the fact that she just grabbed me, that's the weird part. And the fact that
Yeah.
he just grabbed the money out of your hand, that's the weird part. You know, them asking is totally different. Like I've been married to Joe for 15 years, and we were going into the event and there was a long ramp there, and he said, would you like some help up the ramp? Like he always asks, and we've been married for 15 years. He doesn't ever just grab my wheelchair, and it's hard to teach people that sometimes. Like my kids occasionally just grab my wheelchair when they're trying to like help, and I'm like, no, you can't do that. I don't have balance, and if you just push me a certain way, I lose my balance. So it's just odd when people don't ask. But yeah, and the patronizing aspect of it, when they think that you need help because like, or they think that you have less like mental capacity as somebody in a wheelchair, which, you know, there are plenty of people that have developmental disabilities or traumatic brain injuries or whatever that might actually have, you know, need help in that area. But it's just odd. And it's funny because everybody has different opinions about when it's okay to touch without asking. Because when that lady at the college asked me, I said, the only time that I would ever say it's okay to touch somebody's wheelchair without them asking is if they're tipping backwards and you're saving them from falling backwards. But then my friend was like, no, not even then. She was like, one time somebody grabbed me and almost dislocated my arm. And I was like, oh, okay, well, so I was just like, I'd rather somebody almost dislocate my arm than, you know, maybe me crack my head. You know, so
Yeah.
I said it was okay if somebody's tipping backwards, but everybody has their own opinion about that too. It's just an interesting concept that there's like a barrier there to people realizing that that's part of your personal space. And yeah, I've like had people use my handles on the back for like their own balance if they're like standing in line at the grocery store. I've had
Oh
people
yeah, that's
put their foot
gross.
on my caster and just sort of like push me back and forth, and I'm like, hey, that's like, I don't even know you. Like, why are you
Yeah.
touching part of my body? It's just
That's
weird.
like playing footsie. If someone was like touching your
Yeah,
customers, you know, like, hell, how the hell are you doing?
it's so weird. And like occasionally, like I've been like, do you mind not, you know, putting your foot on my wheelchair? And then somebody, oh my God, that was your wheelchair. Like somebody's been like that before where they weren't even paying any attention whatsoever. And it's, you know, it's understandable then, but yeah, interesting concept.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Like the only time I'd want you to touch my wheelchair is if I'm actively falling over or I'm in immediate danger. Like if there's something that I haven't seen, if there's some sort of calamity just about to happen and you want to push me out the way to save my life, go ahead. You know, don't be like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
can I have permission to push a wheelchair? Too late, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. I know. I do find a lot of the time, like if I go to another country and there's a language barrier and people don't know how to ask, sometimes they've just touched my wheelchair, like in Mexico or somewhere where I've been where the staff don't know how to ask me if they can help. I've had a lot of them try to push me or lift me out of my wheelchair in airports and stuff. So that's always been kind of awkward, but then I try to be a little bit understanding.
So recently I've been trying to steelman the opposite side. So I did a podcast recently with a guy called Mike Dewsnap, and we were saying about how it's annoying when people open doors for, you know, like I personally, it's a little bit of a pet peeve. I'm like, I can open a door, but the risk reward ratio for the other person, like if I'm struggling with the door, it's just so happened, you know, if I was struggling with the door and he didn't offer to help, he looks like a dick. And like, you know, I don't know how many times he comes across an active wheelchair user or someone who is going to struggle with the door, but the like, I wonder if from that perspective, it annoys me, but before my accident, I would have, of course, like been like, oh, hey, let me open the door for you. Even though for me, I'm like, I don't need you to open the door, man. I'm independent, like jog on. But yeah, it's interesting how I was thinking about, like, for example, someone, when I was pushing up a steep hill, this was ages ago, he literally just came up behind me and pushed me to the top. And to be honest, it looked like I was really struggling, but I liked that struggle, and it's a
Yeah.
fairly rare thing. I was struggling quite a lot. And I remember there were two different instances. One of the times I was like, hey, don't touch me, man. Like, and he was like, okay. And then I just struggled to the top of the hill. And then the second time I remember thinking, oh, he has touched my wheelchair without me asking. But at the same time, like last time I told someone to jog on and then I struggled. Like, so I actually look like a dick, So I was like, okay, I'll just let this guy push me to the top of the hill and then I'll just thank him because I was struggling a lot. So I had two different experiences, but it's interesting. Like I like to steelman the other person's perspective, because if you do see someone struggling and you don't offer to help, someone else might think that you're hey man, I can't believe you didn't offer to help that push that guy up the hill, And if they are struggling, again, if there's a language barrier, because I do live in France,
Yeah.
it is interesting. And even then, even when I'm really struggling and I'm like, no thanks, I'm good, people are like, okay, that's weird.
Yeah.
It's like I do genuinely want to, like, I've got a strong upper body. I want to push myself up the steep hill, and yeah. So I don't know what you think about that. Like trying to genuinely see it from the other person's perspective.
Yeah. I actually like, if in a situation where I think people do things for people regardless of disability or not, like I think lots of people open doors for lots of different people, at least in Canada. Everybody holds the door for everybody here. So that never annoys me, because I know that people are not thinking that I can't do it. They're just doing it because they want to do it. But yeah, I definitely try my best to see the other person's point of view, even when they are perhaps acting in a patronizing or, overly helpful, like no personal space kind of
Mm.
way. Because I think it's important to see what their perspective is. Because I know we talked about this in a previous podcast before, where if Chris or Joe aren't helping us, then people are
Mm.
looking at them like they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're literally standing there while that person struggles. But like my friend was telling the other lady at the college, she was saying what you think looks like struggle might be their totally capable, normal way of doing something. It just looks like they're struggling to you because they have a disability and they have less, hand function or core function or whatever. So it looks like they're struggling, which it does. It will look like I'm struggling to do things sometimes just because of my core function or whatever, right? So it's just an important concept to educate people on, that, and thank them for doing it. Be like, next time, please ask. It's really
Mm.
important that you ask somebody whether you can touch their wheelchair for these reasons. And I think just don't be a dick about it. But every once in a while, you're only human. So we're going to be a
Yeah,
dick
yeah.
about it sometimes. We're going to be like, fuck off, buddy. Like, don't touch me.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I also wanted to clear up, because a lot of people were in the comments, and you also said it's not a fact if you go through a door and you hold it open, like that's just
Yeah.
polite. Like I would imagine it's when people rush over to the door
Yeah.
and then they hold it,
Yeah.
especially if it's a pull one, because I pull the door and then I go through it and they're there like awkwardly like
Oh,
holding it, and I'm like, you're just in the way now, like just,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like I'm pulling the door and I'm going through. That's how I do it. Whoosh, whoosh. And if you're stood there trying to hold it, then you're in the way. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. It's like holding the door open, absolutely polite. If you didn't, you'd be a dick. But like rushing towards the door, like when you see me approaching, like
Yeah.
that is just
Yeah.
it's just a little like OTT, just not
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah, and there's definitely stupid ways to hold a door for somebody in a wheelchair. Yeah,
Yeah.
do not stand on the outside of the door and try and hold your hand way over it, so we have to play like limbo going under your arm. Don't stand directly in front of the door and so that your feet are in the doorway. Don't do that. Stand on the other side of the door, hold it open, away from everything. But yeah, there's just so many weird things that people do that they're trying to be helpful, and you're like, yeah, can you just get out of the way? And there was actually, like, when I was at the piano thing, a lady in the bathroom, because the doorway was very skinny, and she goes, am I helpful? Am I more helpful holding the door for you or just getting the hell out of the way? And I was like, you're actually more helpful just getting the hell out of the way because there's not room for two of us in here. And she's like, all right, I'll get out of your way. And that was perfect because she was like,
Yeah.
I want to help, but I actually don't know whether I'm just going to be in the way. And I think that's like a basic lesson in life. Like if you're not sure, just ask. Like,
Yeah.
would you like some help? Do you need some help? And if we're like, no, we're good, then don't help. And then you don't have to feel bad about it because you've done your job. You've done sort of the societal thing that you've been trained to do, which is try and help if you can. And if we don't want it, then that's on us, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. And that's such a great response from that person to be so
Yeah.
self-aware of like, hey, am I helping or am I in the way?
Yeah.
But the thing is, a lot of people who do that, like, it's not really a common thing. Like, I'm pretty much the only wheelchair guy. There's another, oh, no, I'm not actually. But the other people are a little bit, I live in a small town and there's another wheelchair guy who's like very independent. Don't really see him very often. There's another lady in a wheelchair who was in rehab with me, and she lives here, but she's like a little bit older. Anyway, my point is, I guess it just in general in society, able-bodied people, when they do help inappropriately, it's probably like one of the first or rare times, like, and they don't listen to podcasts like this. It's not really top of their priority for like the social etiquette of how to deal with a very, because obviously again there's different people. Like out of the 4 people I've thought of in this little town, 2 of those they would probably really appreciate you holding the door open for them, and 2 would be get out the way.
Exactly.
So it's so hard to tell for people to like do. And again, like I say, you probably want to err on the caution of like being wrong than like just watching someone struggle. So
Yeah.
I think that all the time.
Yeah, totally. I think it just points out that everybody is different no matter whether they have a disability or not, and people are going to need or want different things in order to make them feel safe, secure, validated, whatever it is. And yeah, I know a guy that like if you try and help him, he's so offended. Like he's offended to the point of like thinking that people are just they think I'm so low. And I'm like, dude, like this is way too deep for you. I'm like, somebody holds a door for you. It's not a social commentary on, the state of disability in the world. It's just some guy that tried to hold a door open for you. Like, get over it. But interesting. I just wanted to like address some of the comments here before we get away from this topic. Where was the one that I wanted to address? This is the one. It's such a good topic. Also, when you become disabled, the toll it can take on your relationship. And that's one thing that I got like this very stark like understanding or an understanding of how stark, like the stark difference between you having a relationship before you're paralyzed or having a relationship after you have a disability. And I think for us who we've met our significant others after our disability, it's so much better and so much easier than if you were, you were with Lou when you were paralyzed, right?
Yeah, but I'm not with Lou now.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I'm saying. But you were, so maybe you can talk about this because you were with somebody when it happened. So you can talk on the struggles and maybe how much easier a relationship is when you just come into it already being in the disability and not having already set up what it was like to be without it. But I meet a lot of people who are paralyzed after they have been in their relationship, and it's so difficult. Like it's such a challenging thing to come out of on the other side of. For some people, I know some relationships that are like take it very well. Usually it's like the person with the disability though, that's like they can move on easily. They are very independent after, and it doesn't really like it's a bump in the road, but it's not like a crazy thing. Anyway, I just thought I wanted to address that question because I recently have been noticing how much harder it is when I talk to people as they're going through the struggles after they're paralyzed.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I do have like a unique perspective of being with Lou and then I getting paralyzed and us remaining together for many years. And then also coming into a new relationship, being in a wheelchair. And to be totally honest, they're so different. It's so different. I've come into this unprepared to talk about it. So I'm just sort of figuring this out in real time. But I owe Lou so much from her understanding and her grace when I got injured and I felt so low. And I genuinely felt like such a burden. And again, like we said, I felt like a burden, so I was a burden. But she was there for me when I couldn't love myself. She showed me so much love, even when I couldn't see love for myself. So that was really wonderful. And the reason that relationship didn't end wasn't really because of the disability. It was just because we had completely different views, and we on life, like on what our future goals no longer aligned. You know, it really wasn't anything to do with the disability. And she's gone on to live a completely different existence, one that is not compatible with me being in a wheelchair, but also what I want. And then on the other hand, meeting Chris, being in the wheelchair already, I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, it's just incredible to like meet someone who accepts your disability, but it also, I'd accepted my disability. So like, it really makes a difference. If I was in that low place and then I was like trying to, you know, date someone, I couldn't love myself. You know, how could anyone see me in that light? But having met Chris and already been like, you know, active, healthy, independent, you know, and also like, yeah, if you like me, great. Let's, you know, see each other more often. If not, that's absolutely fine. It's not going to break me. You know what I mean? I came across as not really desperate, like quite confident. So I know I've sort of gone off a little bit of a tangent, but they're just so wildly different. That's just like, I think it's probably harder for you to be in a relationship and then get injured, because it changes the dynamic of the relationship so much. Whereas when you come into a relationship already with a disability, that is the dynamic from the beginning. And Chris is really cool because she calls me out on stuff when I think I mentioned to this a couple of episodes ago, you know, when I'm trying to be lazy or something. Like, I had such a funny experience recently where I had my towels from swimming, and I was like, oh, I haven't put my towels to dry. And I just waited. I didn't say anything. I just waited. And she was just like, I guess I'll do that then. And I got out of bed like really slowly. And I was like, okay, I'm doing it then. But I wanted to like let her jump in and be like, oh no, it's okay, I'll do that for you. But she's like, nah, do that yourself, mate. Like, you know, and I was like, yeah, you're right. And then when I was hanging my towels up, I absolutely burst into laughter because I asked her, I was like, oh, did you notice how slow I was getting out of bed then? She was like, yeah, mate, I could see you. You're so transparent. Like, I know you're trying to get me to do it. Like, get her to do it without asking her. And it was just very, very funny. But I really like that. I like that she holds me accountable to, like, when we first met, I made it very obvious that I wasn't, she was never going to be a caregiver, you know, or a housemaid, you know, like I'm independent, like we, you know, and so, you know, a year and a half later, she's not like, hey, mate, you know, come on, you can do that. So I love that. So yeah, I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But yeah, like I say, I think the answer to your question is it's probably harder to be in a relationship and then have the paralysis or the disability, and then that dynamic change.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem and this is like, I'm totally just generalizing, and this absolutely isn't for every relationship, but in the relationships that I've seen fail, it's almost always more about the person with the disability struggling with their own identity rather than the person that's with them accepting their new identity, because they haven't fully formed their new identity yet. And I think most people, they love that person and they are willing to accept them, whatever it is, whatever the challenge is, but the person hasn't yet accepted themselves. And then they project all of their insecurities on the other person. And then they are like, I know that you'd rather be with somebody else. And I saw you looking at that girl or that guy, and I know that you are unsatisfied sexually, and like whatever it is. Like, I'm talking about like all the things that like these are literally things that I've gone through that I have projected on my partner before because I was insecure about them, instead of just being like, now I'm secure in them. And every once in a while, like, and when Joe said that thing, then it brings up all these old limiting beliefs and shit. And I realized that that's a me problem. If I'm jealous and think that he's going to go date somebody that's able-bodied, or that somebody that's able-bodied can, you know, give him better sex or whatever it is, like, these are just truthful things that go through my head. That's a me problem. That's not a him problem. I have to deal with those things. And me being like whining about not being able to be whatever kind of sexual partner that I want to be, or I can't do all the active things that I wish I could do, me whining to him about that all that's doing is creating like this void, reminding him of all the things that he's like missing, instead of
Mm.
having like positive interactions and being like, oh my God, these are all the things I love about her. It's reminding him all the things that, oh, she's such a naggy bitch. She's so negative all the time. She's so like, she's such a drain on my energy. And that when I'm around people like that are just negative, 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 and I have to keep reinforcing to them why they're like special or why I love them, I'm like, I don't know. It's so exhausting it's so draining on your own energy. So if you are like that when you are first paralyzed, it's totally understandable. But at some point, you have to realize that your insecurities, all these horrible things that are happening to you because of your disability, you do need support to get through them, but they are a you problem. They are a
Mm.
you problem, and they are mental, emotional struggles that you have to come to terms with in order for your relationship to flourish. Obviously, there's going to be assholes. There's going to be people that, just leave people because of their disability and stuff. But anyway, yeah, that's sort of my take on things that I've seen from the outside. That it's almost always the person with the disability struggling more than the person without the disability.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
There's so much I want to say about that. So what about if the person with the disability, it like, because I've had when you said about the sex stuff, it just rung a bell. Like Lou and I used to have such incredible open communication. It was absolutely awesome. And I'm going to share something quite personal now, but I remember when we were breaking up, we had like what we called it what did we call it? We had a special word for it. We didn't call it breaking up, but like I don't know, it was something hippy dippy kind of thing, like a conscious separation. That's what it was, a conscious separation. And we had like loads of like open talks, but like we were like, look, we're not compatible with each other, so we're going to go our separate ways. I wish you all the best, and she wished me all the best. And I said something like that. Well, was feeling really insecure about, and I said, oh, I bet you, like you can't wait to make love to someone who's able-bodied once again. And she was like, what? And like it blew her mind. She was like, I've learned so much about intimacy since your injury that it's been like the best ever. She's like, I wouldn't change it for the world. Like, I can't believe you'd even say that. That's like the furthest
Yeah.
thing from my mind. And I was like, oh, okay, that was obviously a deep-seated insecurity that I had, like, oh, I bet you can't wait for someone to be able to like pick you up and move you around. And she was like, no, like not at all. Like, and because we had a special like intimate connection that was you have to be more creative with a disability, right? And she
Yeah.
said that she'd learned so much from that, and I remember being so shocked to hear that and be like, oh wow, okay. And yeah, she paid me a few like compliments. If I repeat them, it'll just sound like so I'll just, yeah, it was really lovely just to have that feedback of like, oh wow, okay, so that's not how she feels, that's how
Yeah.
I feel about the situation.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say before we move on was, yeah, if the person with a disability suffers from insecurities, that can be really, like I say, it's probably reflecting back. But what if the person with the disability, with the physical disability, is suffering mentally? Like I remember there was a time in the early days, maybe like about a year after my injury, where I was pretty depressed and I was so low, and I would just spend so much time in bed because, like, my spasms were bad, and like my nerve pain was bad, and like my headspace was bad. I just spend time in bed and I wasn't contributing to the tasks that needed to be done around the house, the things that I could do. And that took its toll on Lou, and that made her more of a carer and more of a housemaid kind of thing. And I remember thinking, only in hindsight, this became more obvious, like, but the things that I was insecure about, the things that, I am a burden, I was making myself a burden by being lazy and not doing the things like that really mattered. So yeah, it's interesting. I just wanted to bring that up. Like, what do you think about that situation? Not with insecurity, but something that you can't really help, because when you're depressed, it's natural to feel depressed about being paralyzed at first, but there's a little bit of nuance there. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I think there has to be a lot of leeway in the beginning for the person with the disability. I think there has to be, a lot of rope kind of given to them in terms of like what you should accept from them as a partner, and what you can sort of give them shit about or call them out on. You might need to like there needs to be a little bit of sensitivity there in the beginning, but also nobody feels good about themselves unless they're with somebody that holds them accountable. Like you said, it might not feel great in the moment when Lou's like, I'm not getting up. Like you can put your own towel away. Like, that might not feel good to you because you might be like, just it takes you 2 seconds in your mind. You're thinking, please just get up. I don't want to get up. But also it feels so much better in the end when you are capable of doing things for yourself. And the only reason that I've learned to do so much for myself is because I've literally said this so many times to like my friends. I'm like, Joe's always been kind of an asshole to me. Like he's always been like, no, you are total. I'm not doing that. Get over it. And sometimes I'm like, this would take you 2.5 seconds, but if it's a slippery slope to be like that with somebody with a disability, and he is like that, like if I drop something behind my nightstand or something right when I've gone to bed, that I'm gonna have to get in my wheelchair, I'm gonna have to move all the junk, I'm gonna have to move my nightstand, slide it way out of the way so I can get in between there and my like he'll get up and get something like that for me. But if I like I can't even think of what other things. But if it's something simple, then yeah, he's not volunteering to get up unless I'm sick or something, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be held accountable eventually. So if at the beginning you're depressed, I think eventually somebody has to say, like, I had severe postpartum anxiety, looked the worst. I went to the hospital so many times. I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, but now I know years later that's what it was. I thought I was dying every day. I could barely leave the house. I was borderline agoraphobic. Like, I was so worried my kids were going to die every 2 seconds. Like, it was horrible. And eventually Joe was like, Britt, like, I get it. I don't know how you're feeling. I don't know what it's like to have gone through all the 9 months of pregnancy, birth, all that stuff. I don't know what it's like to not feel, most of my body and not know what's going on. But he's like, eventually, you either got to have faith that you're fine or not. Like, he's just like, this is really hard to live with for yourself and for me. So, like, we need to figure this shit out. And because he held me accountable, I sought help. I found tools. I started doing like cognitive behavioral therapy and challenging my like scary thoughts and doing things, going outside the house. And he would always come get me. Like if I got somewhere and I'm like, I can't drive home, I'm having a panic attack, he'd come get me and he'd be like, good try, we're gonna do it again. So he would do that stuff, but like he wouldn't just accept that I was just gonna lay in bed for the rest of my life and be, like that. Cause
Yeah.
he's like, you won't like yourself if you're like that. So you do need somebody that's going to hold you accountable. So I say lots of leeway in the beginning, but you have to eventually be like, this isn't good for you or me. It's not good for yourself or our relationship. And I know you can do better. I know you can do better. And I know what you're made of. And if you come at it like that, generally, I think people are very, you need to believe in somebody before they believe in themselves. But it's really hard, especially when they've gone through something traumatic. So I don't know. It'd be nice if other people could weigh in terms of what their partner did. If you are still in a relationship that you
Yeah.
were in before you were paralyzed and after, what things did your partner do that allowed you to, sort of come to terms with your disability, but
Yeah.
still hold you accountable?
So I've got some things to add. So I think I remember rightly that this is what happened. So in that period of me being really low, and thinking of myself as a burden and then amplifying my burdenness, Lou wrote me a letter. She like wrote me a very honest letter, and I think that's such a great way to communicate. I would always think about open communication as a priority in a relationship, and that was one of the things Lou and I had that was really, really awesome. And she wrote me an honest letter just explaining it, and it wasn't like, I feel really bad for you that you're depressed. It was like, hey, listen, you're bringing me down. Like, you say that you're a burden, but you're being a burden. You are like, this is how not to be a burden. Like, I can't remember exactly how it was, but it was a real wake up call. I was like, oh my god, you're right. Like, and it snapped me out of it. And sometimes you need that, sometimes you can I don't want to use maybe pander. You can enable someone's depression by like, and I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to just blanket people's depression as but
Yeah.
sometimes people need to hear it straight, like you and I think you can enable people's depression, especially if it's situational depression. You could be like, oh, I'm really sorry, it must suck being paralyzed. Be like, hey, it sucks that you fucking lay around the house all day and you don't like do stuff, like, come on, you don't want to be a burden, then don't be a burden. Like, the washing up needs doing, you know what I mean? Like, this needs doing, you can do that, so go and do that.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I had this one comment that I wanted to highlight, because this one from Andrew. One of the things that really upset me is when I
that
kick
was
my
like,
partner when she's sleeping because of my spasms. This really hit home, because this was one of the things that like accelerated my depression, was because I was still struggling to come to terms with my paralysis. And one of the things that I hated the most was that my legs would like move involuntarily. It was like pissing me off so much. And then, because you get paralyzed, and then they start telling you about all the secondary complications. And I was like, what the hell? My legs are dancing around. And when I was hugging Lou in bed, I was like kicking her. And then I remember it. She like turns around and said, listen, I'm really sorry, but I can't sleep. You're going to have to face the other way. So I was denied a cuddle, and I like turned around. I was like, oh, my life sucks so much. I'm probably going to kill myself. It was awful. But like, it's one of those things that like,
yeah.
it was so awful. Like I was kicking her. Like, it was annoying me as well. But like, they prescribed me like Valium, so like to calm them down. So I was having Valium and falling asleep, but they were still kicking away, in the night. And oh, it was so horrible. So there are some really shitty things that we do have to deal with paralysis, and that was one of them. Was involuntarily kicking Lou, and then like being denied the cuddle. I was like, oh god, that's savage.
Then that's exactly one of those things, like, that's hard not to take personally, that you have to be like, relate to them and be like, this, I hate that my spasms are like this. And come together instead of moving apart, instead of being like fuck you, you're making me feel even worse about something I can't even help. Like, how dare you? Because that is one way to look at it. But then another way to is just be like hug her, kiss her, and be like, my spasms are really annoying. Hey, and then, go come together more so that they don't feel like shit about it. You don't feel like shit about it. It's just a shitty situation. But it's hard. It's so hard not to get that like that feeling where you're just like a rejected puppy or something, and then you just go in the corner and wallow. But I definitely think that you can act like a victim, you can feel like a victim, and you can act like a victim, and then you are a victim. Or you can act, you can feel like a victim, and then you can be like, okay, but I'm not a victim. I'm feeling this, but I'm actually not a victim. She's not trying to hurt me. So she's not victimizing me by telling me the truth, which is the whole conversation I had with myself yesterday after Joe said that thing. Like, I was just like, okay, stop being a victim. He wasn't trying to be mean or whatever. And then like, he actually sent me this like beautiful text today, because I was like, I'm sorry for all the things that I was being annoying yesterday just because I was mad. And then he was like, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry you looked at it that way, love. It's not how I look at it. I have no regrets, as I love you more than I can express. I can't ever imagine anyone else. I just can't picture it, even somebody in a wheelchair. So he said that, and I'm like, okay, you're like the best ever. And he wasn't trying to be mean. He was just being honest. And I think that people have to be able to be honest to people with disabilities without fear of, somebody feeling sorry for themselves forever. And I think that's what happens a lot, especially with a new injury, is people feel so sorry for themselves, and they want their partner to feel sorry for them. And they think everybody else should feel sorry for them. And if people don't feel sorry for them, they're just like, like they think she's not really a friend. She's like on Instagram. She's far away in a different country, but she's constantly being a victim. If her husband, who has to help her, she's a paraplegic, and her husband helps her with bowel routine, showering, like everything. And when he gets mad about it, she's like, you don't even know. My life is way harder than yours because I'm in a wheelchair. And I'm like, your husband is wiping your ass and like sticking his finger up your butt in order to poop. I'm like, yeah, your life is hard, but I would argue that his life is probably harder because you're not doing all the shit that you should be doing, and he still stayed married to you for all these years. So maybe give the guy a break. Like, that's how I think. But she gets so mad at him if he ever complains or anything. And so anyway,
that sounds very unhealthy. There's some things I wanted to talk about. So come full circle to the Joe thing. I had a friend recently who had I have to be quite vague here, but like he had an issue with a family member, and he told me the story, and I remember thinking, oh, that's awful, man. Like that's really, how could she do that? How could she be so, um, disrespectful of your feelings as well, especially, at this time and blah, blah, blah. And then he sent me the text message exchange. And then I was like, oh,
Oh,
wow. I was like, he's like, because we're very, very good friends. And he said, look, I love your brand of honesty. Because I do tell it like it is. And I just said, hey man, you don't come across great. This is not the story you told me yesterday. This is a reasonable request. And I think that you're in the wrong here. I think that you need to put down the magnifying glass and pick up the mirror. And that's the
that's a good
very
thing.
yeah, that's the very short, concise version. And he said, "Yeah, thanks." He's like, "That's amazing. I appreciate that. Like it, if I'm and again, we have a special relationship, and he's very, very mature. He's like, amazing, because I can't change that person, but I can change me. And if I am the problem, then that's great. I really appreciate your honesty, man. I'm going to talk about it with my therapist." And I was like, "Sweet, no worries." And I think that's the power of good friendships. And
Yeah.
it's really cool. It's really special when you can accept that feedback.
I love that saying. I've never heard that before. Put down the magnifying glass and pick up the mirror.
Do you want to see some artwork
Amazing.
I did? Oh,
Oh,
hold on.
yeah. Let's do it.
I love it so much that I drew this picture.
That is the perfect thing to give your husband when you think he's being a dick. You're the asshole and you're a monkey. But like that one's like,
So
yeah.
yeah. So basically, it represents so the monkey is who's looking back in the mirror.
Yeah.
So basically, when I take psychedelics, I often think of myself as like a very evolved ape. I look at my fingers and I'm like, whoa, I can't believe like we used to be monkeys and now we just got these crazy brains. Like, anatomically I'm designed to probably climb a tree or something,
Yeah.
So it was like really cool. That's what I often think about when I'm on psychedelics. And put down the magnifying glass, pick up the mirror is such a wonderful thing that always happens to me on psychedelics. Say, for example, if I'm having an issue with a family member or a spouse or anyone, if I'm like, oh my God, they're the problem, very often it gets reflected back to me and I'm like, oh shit, am I the problem? Oh, God damn it, maybe I'm the problem. So I drew this because obviously he's got the magnifying glass, which he's putting down. And then the monkey's looking back at him in the mirror. And the mirror is being supplied by some sort of weird, wacky mushroom things. But yeah, anyway,
I love that.
and I love it because it's just a little reminder to, don't be a dick.
Yeah. On that note, I wanted to share this. Like, I thought it's like a heartwarming little thing that Jacob said after his fight that I think is just such a good. I never heard it put like that either. The way that he put this thing that I'm going to tell you guys, and it was so awesome. So Jacob has been in competitive boxing since he was 9, and he will be 16 in 1 week, or no, 10 days. 10 days, he'll be 16, and he's had a number of fights recently and he's lost all of them. So he's had 5 fights and he's lost 5 fights. And after this fight, and he's got such a good attitude about it, but after this fight, because I wasn't at this one and I was so worried about it, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, bud. Like, I'm sure you did awesome. And he goes, yeah, I'm just on a learning streak instead of a losing streak. And I was like, what an amazing thing to say. Yeah. And I'm like, how did my 15-year-old know to say that I'm on a learning streak and not a losing streak? And so I was like, dude, that is the best. And that is the ultimate, put down the magnifying glass, pick up the mirror, because he can't do anything in a fight. The guy he's fought is gone now. All he can do is learn from it and change what he can do for the next fight, right? So he's got to pick up the mirror, figure out what it is he can learn. So I thought that was just really relatable after you said that. And yeah. Do I have the best kid ever or what?
You do have the best kid ever. That's so crazy that it's come full circle, because I was going to ask that's all my notes now. I was going to ask what fights Jacob did, but that's so cool. Yeah. A learning streak. What absolute wisdom in the young mind of your son. What an absolute legend. I really hope that he knows that as well. That's so rare as well. I'm on a learning streak. He must have some good coaches down at the gym. I think that must be
he does have very supportive and like loving coaches, whether like they've never really boxed competitively, so that's a little bit of a challenge. But they wrote a beautiful little like tribute to Jacob when they posted his fight. Like, this kid has got such dedication, and no matter how many times he loses, he just keeps going back into the ring with such a great attitude. And he's never like, that guy was a horrible fighter. He was like, oh, this guy did this really good. And he's just got such a good attitude about it. And that's what I always said. I said, I'm more proud of you for going into the ring and losing and still getting back up and doing it again. Cause I'm like, it's easy to have confidence when you win. I'm like, it's not easy to have confidence when you lose and keep doing it. And he's like, well, I just love the sport. He's like, I'd do it whether I lost every time or not. So I'm like, okay, that's really good. And I'm like, I don't really want you to, keep getting punched in the head for your whole life. But right now he really loves the sport. And combat sports actually have some of the most amazing, like, it's a competitive spirit, but the sportsmanship in combat sports is nothing like I've ever seen before. Like, they go in, bump gloves, they try and kill each other for 3 minutes. And then after they like hug, like this one fight I saw, they were both so exhausted that when they went ding, they just like fell into each other's arms and were like hugging. And I was like, what the heck? It was so funny. And they were like, good job, man. Like, they were like sweating and crying and stuff. And I was like, okay, this is not what you would expect from like, very testosterone driven boys. But yeah.
100%, man. I think that like the UFC's got really popular recently, and I think there is something like really relatable from just a like, what's the word, like a natural instinct when you see two people fighting. That's what I guess we're a violent race. We've come up, and it's so the UFC is very, very popular, and I see it like quite often. People will beat the shit out of each other and then just be like, oh, hey man, good fight, well done. And it's interesting. They'll just be bloody. They would have absolutely punched the shit out of each other, and then they just hug. And I think it's awesome. I've never really been into it. I did Wing Chun for like a little bit
neat.
when I was younger, and but yeah, I never really got into competitive fighting or anything like that. But yeah, I think that's great. Listen, this has been one of my favorite podcasts that we've done.
Too.
Like, this has been so awesome, so wholesome as well. Like, I love the fact that we've hit on so many cool topics, and I really appreciate all the comments. Everyone's been so nice in the comments as well. So yeah.
Just a quick note before we go, Kip, that's my son's boxing name. So Kip Moore, he just put a comment. For some reason, that's my son's boxing alias is Kip. It's funny.
Cool.
This has been a really good conversation. I love when we have very real conversations about things that are happening in our lives, and then they just kind of branches out from there.
Yeah, I liked it too, because I didn't really have that much to talk about. And then I think it's quite nice. Sometimes that's even better, because then we just go down the rabbit hole. I like it. Little bit of podcast housekeeping. Next week, we have the devotee guy coming on, right?
We do. Yeah. It's going to be awesome.
Do you want to say a few words about that?
So I will give you sort of like a synopsis of who he is. He is a police officer out of Texas. I'm not exactly sure which city or anything he lives in, but I met him a long time ago when he was dating a girl in a wheelchair, and then they ended up breaking up, and we just chatted about it. And he admitted that he was a devotee, and he's a very normal, nice individual. So I think he's a really awesome person to have come on here, because we always have an idea of what we think a devotee is and looks like. He's already asked if he could say, like, if he can swear on the podcast, because he's like, if I drop an F-bomb or like a shit, am I going to get in trouble? And I'm like, nope, you're good. And he just wants to totally off the cuff. So I asked if he wanted the questions ahead of time, and he said no. So if you guys watching have any questions for a devotee, somebody that has, wheelchair fetishes, that kind of thing, please put them in the comments, and we'll make sure that we ask them while the podcast is on. I know that Fred and I are going to come up with our own questions, so we have, an agenda of sort of what we're going to ask. But it should be a really good conversation. I'm really excited. So join us for it. Yeah.
One more thing before we go. There was a comment saying the podcast that I sent you and that we listened to, what is it called? I'm going to put it in the... Yeah. I've just dropped a comment now. It was Konstantin Kissin on Diary of a CEO podcast. So if you just type that in, you'll be able to find it.
Yeah.
It was a really good podcast. I just thought it was, I don't know, the guy was so eloquent. He explained his point of view really well. It had loads of good points. Like, you loved it, Brian loved it, and it was really eye-opening and thought-provoking.
Totally.
Said,
yeah, I really loved it. Fred's frozen. Right at the end, Fred's frozen. Okay, well, I'm going to end the podcast then. Thanks, guys, so much for watching. I will see you guys next week when we have the devotee. Bye.
Oh, did I just cut out? I just
you totally cut out. I said bye to everybody. So we're saying bye now. Bye, everybody.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.